Next up is Leslie Davis, Assessor. Got to put these on so I can appear more intelligent and sensitive.
It's working.
Leslie has been an employee of the Assessor's Office since 2000 and took in after former Assessor Metzger left. She has subsequently been elected to her position in 2010. She holds a master's degree in public administration from California State University and a bachelor's degree in psychology with the University of Colorado. You know, the psychology is going to pay off for her now because this poor lady's got more mental stress by cutting her budget, and she's leading the state in returning taxpayer money that the state requires the assessor to do when the values of the home go down. And so she's trying to do that to get the money back to the taxpayers that the money belongs. And then so some of the politicians beat her up over it, saying, "Well, you're not dragging your feet. And why are you so in such a hurry to get the money back to the taxpayers?" And which goes to show you a little bit about the problems we have in county government. Thank you.
I'll answer your question about the cane first. About a week and a half ago, I turned and my knee didn't. So I'm just doing a little recovery and we'll be fine. So Al's quite right, and so is Cliff, when alluding to the problems that we sometimes have with the Board of Supervisors. They are starting to realize what I do for a living and beginning to and they're beginning to recognize that sometimes when I do it right, it causes them downstream problems. But the good news in the room, and I really want you to recognize that Rebecca Callan, our County Auditor Controller, and Barbara Sullivan, our Treasurer Tax Collector, and I are sitting next to each other. We are a great team. Important to acknowledge the hard work that they do as part of the finance team and the hard work I think all of your elected officials do at the department head level. We know that I have a little tiff now and again with certain board members, one of whom I would not be voting for if I were in his seat. So, I know it's right after lunch. I was hoping I was going to follow John because he can wake an audience up with jokes and great stuff, but alas, poor you, I'm going to bore you with some statistics because I'm going to lead into a couple things you might want to know and then you'll have to wake back up. Tanya, thank you for putting the map up. This map has all of Calaveras County's boundaries, and within those boundaries are 45,094 secure parcels. It's about 669,000 acres in Calaveras County. Now, of that, 1,494 parcels, about 3.3% of the numbers are tax exempt, meaning they're owned by government, state, fed, local agencies. But it represents almost 21% of the land mass, about 143,000 acres. Of those 45,000 parcels last year, we reduced 17,100 of them due to declining market values, or about 38%. Another 2.5% were even below that because they're in the Williamson Act, California Land Conservation Act. We have 3,653 unsecured assessments. Those are the assessments on people's businesses, boats, planes, and property that they own, but it's on somebody else's ground. We have, in case you're wondering, 2,044 business accounts in the county. 871 of those are secured, which means the business is owned by the person who owns the real property, and the balance, about 1,200, are unsecured. Just in case you're wondering how many homeowners we have 11,568 homeowners exemptions. And what that means is that's how many people, about a quarter of the county. The properties are owned by folks who claim it as their primary residence, so they're not the second home. Our secured goal is just over $5.6 billion. We're just ahead of Tuolumne County there, Dave. We ranked 42nd in the state last year. And about 150 million of those assessed values are tax exempt, which means that homeowner's exemption, whether they have a church exemption or some other type of exemption. Last year's unsecured roll was just under $140 million, and $30 million of that was exempt. Two basic hot topics in our world right now, in my world. One is the State Board of Equalization Assessment Practices Survey, and the other is decline in value. And since I know you care about decline in value, I'm going to talk about this first. By law, the Board of Equalization goes out and surveys assessors' offices about every 5 years. LA County is the exception. They're called the county in the first class. They're surveyed every year. But the rest of us get surveyed about every 5 years, and when the Board of Equalization is done, they issue this report. Now, they came into my office during my campaign 2 years ago. They issued the report 2 months ago. So that should give you an idea of how up to date we are. And if you want to read it, you can go onto the Board of Equalization website, click under property taxes, go all the way down in one column under publications, and you can dig down and find the last 3 of our assessment practices surveys. I get one that's bound. If you want one, you have to print it yourself. And I get it bound along with my responses, so you can read my responses to the Board of Equalization staff. The bad news is they found 7 areas they think we need to change. They found 1 error on a church exemption, and they thought that was important enough to write up. And I'll tell you, in the assessment world, we like to give them something they can find, right, Dave? So we fixed that problem. They think we should change our process to value construction that's in progress on the lien date, which means on January 1st, if it's not quite done, they didn't like the way we valued it. They didn't like the way we valued our possessory interest assessment, and I didn't like the fact that I couldn't figure it out. So we'll be figuring that one out and fixing it. And then they found a number of problems with our audit procedures. They discovered that audits hadn't been completed for 2 years. They discovered that our internal checklist wasn't being used. And they thought we should mail property statements to as many businesses as possible, and then we should penalize anyone who doesn't file their property statement. Now, you know how I feel about that, but it turns out, and I just mentioned this casually, the grand jury agrees. So we're back in business to penalize people who don't file property statements, probably starting next year. The good news is they think our appeals program runs well. In other words, my staff is well prepared, and they handle those defensive of their valuations well. They felt our process to prevent conflicts of interest within the office was adequate, and they looked at the valuation of staff-owned property and found no problems. I tell you that because you might remember a couple of years ago a little controversy about my property, and so they specifically called out that they looked at my property and found no problems with that value. It's in writing, they signed it. There you go. They complimented our approach on disabled veterans exemptions, because one of the things that we do in my office is we call all of the disabled veterans every year to ensure that they file for their exemption before the deadline, so that they don't get hit with 80% of the exemption instead of the full. They thought our review of reappraisable events, which are the documents that you record changing ownership, were done properly, including our legal entity ownership program. And I was really hoping to go after you because I was hoping we could have a little debate, but we're not going to, John, so I'm assuming we're not going to talk about that. They thought we valued Williamson Act properties properly. They thought we had a sound and reliable program to assess manufactured homes, and finally, they believed our decline in value program was effective and well administered. So, they were delighted to see how proactive we were with our decline in value program, and that is the rub, I think, with Supervisor Tryon, that we are in fact proactive, because I believe very strongly that my job is to ensure that everyone has fair and equitable assessments, and that we don't decide to not look at declines in value because of the downstream effects. Those downstream effects simply are what they are. The economy is not good, and it's my job to reflect what is going on with market values on January 1st, so we do that. Let me tell you where we are in declines in value. Right now, my appraisers have spent the last 3 weeks reviewing about 33,500 parcels, or roughly 74% of secured parcels in the county. What they asked me to do was give them a list of all properties that fit the following criteria. They needed to be residential, single family, not apartments, on less than 50 acres, and they wanted me to exclude anything that sold after October 1st. because those were the values they would be using to analyze. So when they enrolled those values, they didn't want to accidentally override it with some other analysis. So 33,500 parcels approximately are being reviewed by my appraisers. I happen to know what their conclusions are right now, not specifically. I know that they've taken almost 5% off the assessment roll because of the analysis. 5% of $5.5 billion is a lot of money coming off that assessment roll. So I'm sure that when we finally finish our work this year, and by the way, I asked for a 30-day extension to close the assessment roll. When we finally finish our assessment roll, the board is going to see a reduction. Where are we going to see the most reduction? Well, thank you for putting this map on the because you'll remember that originally the big reductions were happening in the western end of the county. Copperopolis got hit first, Valley Springs, Wallace, Burson pretty much followed suit very closely thereafter. And the reason for that is that's the area closest to Stockton, and Stockton is ground zero for the foreclosures that have hit this state. And Modesto would be ground one because they weren't far behind. So that end of the county really experienced major declines, and they experienced them quickly. I know that my property value has been reduced almost 50%. You'd think that would make me happy that I'm paying fewer taxes, but it really makes me unhappy that I'm losing that much in equity. And I think I share that sentiment with a whole lot of people. They'd rather be able to do well and pay the taxes than to know that this is happening. In fact, I was at the, and Dorian, excuse me for plugging another restaurant, I was at the Fusion Grill down in Valley Springs last week. And my fortune cookie, the fortune said, a fine is a tax for doing wrong. A tax is a fine for doing well. And I thought of that as I thought about these reductions that we're experiencing. What my appraisers are seeing now, and I've seen it happen over the last 3 years, is the declines are coming up the hill. And this year, what they're seeing is the declines are now stretching up the Highway 4 corridor. So the larger declines are probably going to be seen up the Highway 4 corridor. There are a few pockets where we're seeing values bounce back, but not back to what we call factor base year value. In other words, they aren't back to what they should be. They're simply coming back. So there are some properties that are probably going to go up. Some of you may remember Calypso Bay. It really went down hard and fast. That area is starting to come back a little bit. But for the most part, we're expecting to see quite a few properties in the declining value status for this year. Now, any property that isn't in declining value status, so really have to maybe you've owned your house for decades, I don't know. 30 years. Okay. If you're not in declining value status, then you will see your value go up by the 2% required under the statute. And excuse me, John, for saying this, but my career started a year before Prop 13 passed. So when people say Prop 13, I know what they're talking about, but to me, I have to say, it's Article 13A of the California Constitution. It's not a proposition and it's not a new idea. It's a constitutional provision how we do this. Part of that constitutional provision was, once your value is established, it can't be increased by more than the change in the California Consumer Price Index or 2%, whichever is less. So what the Board of Equalization has told us is for those properties that aren't under some kind of restricted value or lowered value, they will be going up to 2% this year. Okay? So that's where we are with decline of values.